the 155,000-foot mark in altitude, some 26 miles downrange. And that the solid rocket boosters performed as expected in the first stage of this 8.5-minute ride to orbit. Call indicating that if one engine fails right now, Discovery has enough velocity, enough inertia to make a transatlantic abort at the prime TAL site at Ben Gurion on the west coast of Africa. All systems continue, however, to function normally at the 3.5-minute mark into the flight. That call from spacecraft communicator Kirk Brown to Commander Tom Hendricks gives the approval for mission specialist Don Thomas to unstrap from his seat, feeling the first effects of weightlessness.
Hello, welcome to a segment of Chicago Corner on Tuesday. This should have been on at 2 p.m. Apologies for that. We're going to try to do these little segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2. Nothing too intense. I'm probably going to be streaming from home while Gunner's adjusting for the day. A lot more content coming your way from our channel. But we shared a lot last week about different protests that we covered. The protests are ongoing, and we are always, looking for more footage. But we want to share some more of the interviews and some more of the stuff that we got from these protests that happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder.
Beep, beep, beep. And I am pulling that up right. Oh, yay. There's always so much to... Jose, how are you doing? Let's just go. Let's just start there. You doing?
Oh, let's start there? Yeah, okay. Geez, I didn't really think about it.
This is the one question you didn't prepare for.
Yeah, no, I wasn't ready for that one. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I made a mistake and I got a like a matcha latte, but I didn't ask for almond milk.
Oh,
I paid $5 for it,
right.
so I have
Risky
to drink
business.
it. You know.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm doing. Actually, in a nutshell, that's how I'm doing so far.
Yeah.
But
Serious. Yeah.
other than
You
that, not
know,
bad.
in a better world, that should be, that's plenty for a day, I would say,
It's
you know,
it is
on top of
definitely.
everything else we're going to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, I'm ready.
All
So
right.
switching over
Very cool.
here, and who is this that we are going to be looking at this interview?
What you call it? Blah, what you call it? CTU organizer. What you call it? And friend Anna. Um, what you call it? As a, kind of a quick interview here about at a CTU rally. Just that was a few weeks ago. We shared a few interviews from Vice President Stacey Davis Gates
Mm.
and a teacher from Whitney Young. Kind of a very high a magnet high school in Chicago. Anna is what you call it, a teacher on the southwest side of Chicago, predominantly Latino neighborhood.
Okay, cool. And here we go.
My name is Ana Costa. I'm a teacher at Kelly College Prep on the southwest side in Bryant Park. I've been in the classroom for 19 years. So I am definitely an advocate for police-free schools, and mainly because I believe, research shows, data shows that police in schools don't make students feel safer. In fact, there's a lot of racial profiling when police are inside the building. And I am definitely angry that $33 million of our CPS budget is going towards contracting police officers when in fact we can contract the people our students need. They need social workers, they need nurses, they need counselors. They need people that know them and will be able to help them out with their traumas. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being out here.
So that's really, I mean, she raises a good point there. I know, just that it's sort of the same point that we've been talking about, I guess, for a while now with all of with all these protests. Is really the main point is that it's kind of senseless in spending $30 million on police in schools whenever it's been shown that police in schools don't do much to solve violence in schools.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also happy to hear that this week, hopefully, this bill of Bernie Sanders cutting military funding is moving ahead in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we can't keep treating every problem with punitive violence as a response when, human beings aren't behaving the way we want them to behave. And police are trained, as you said before, really more for crowd control, cattle control.
Mm-hmm.
Their weapons, their tools are blunt weapons,
Yeah.
are blunt objects, right?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not,
Don't even think about it that way, right? It's
right. They don't have like, a lollipop in case they need to de-escalate the situation.
Mhm.
They have a gun. So not the best message that we could be sending public school students. And if there's something wrong with, the ways that students are behaving, then, those problems do start at home. And people that are living in the city, have to kind of work together to live in the society. So we need to do better by our neighborhoods and investments there. I know that we had some more footage from the march on the southwest side as
yeah. Let
well.
me kind
Sure.
of sort through that while we. So, we talked about like police being cattle wranglers, I guess you could call them
Right.
in a sense, right? And
Right.
I mean, I don't inherently have a problem with that being the role of police in a sense, like they could obviously we could do better at arranging and organizing a police force that isn't just based in cruelty, right? Obviously.
Not
But
based on, yeah.
but like if police are going to be used as sort of like a crowd controlling unit, then put them in places where that is sort of necessary, right? Like put them in protests and have them be. We went to DCK Punk and I last weekend went to a very small protest for Tammy against Tammy Duckworth at her house, right? And it was like 10 people who ended up showing up. The organizer didn't even show up to the thing. She wasn't even in the state. All of that beside the point, right? We kind of spoke briefly with the police officers who were there, and the police off camera, right, was saying like, I'm here, I'm all for it. I understand that you guys are here because you have problems and you want them to be vocalized. I don't know what's going on with the computer here, but whatever. We'll push through it. The police was saying like, look, I don't have a problem with why you guys are here. Just keep it cordial. Keep it, keep off of people's property and just let me guide you guys the way that you had arranged for it to be placed, right? And nothing, to the best of my knowledge, we left a little bit early, but nothing bad happened, right? There was no incidents of violence or anything like that. And I think for a large part, protests that I have seen in Chicago, the larger protests, have not ended in violence. But then again, I know that there are some that have, and
Right. Well, I mean, it's also, as we've seen, police can also instigate violence when they feel compelled to. We didn't have a whole lot of violent, interactions when the people to reopen the economy protests marched into City Hall with their assault rifles. For some reason, it's a pretty common occurrence with these Black Lives Matter protests for police to, be whipping out tear gas, pushing people, shoving people, hitting them with batons.
I think about it too, like I was in the infantry component of the Army, right? And I just think about the sort of the ways that you were trained to sort of behave in a war zone, right? Where it's like you're not supposed to inherently be instigating things, but you are a component of violence, right? Whenever you need to be. And there's something that's powerful to that, but also like that belongs over there, right? Like out of the United States. Our police don't need to have the same sort of mentality that soldiers are supposed to have, because police in the end are not soldiers. They're peace officers. They're civil servants. They are supposed to be people who are there to protect and uplift, in my opinion, their communities and make them safer. But what you end up seeing is kind of the opposite in a lot of senses.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of people that would like to push police reform to make police a component of the military, so they at least have training and guidelines, that adhere to that. But then, like you said, police shouldn't be soldiers. You're basically militarizing policing your people. You're at war. The government is at war with its public. Which people might say, well, of course we are, and that's the way. I mean, like literally, we are an experiment to not be that.
Yeah.
And Trump saying the quiet part loud for all the white supremacists in the country, is really challenging us. How we can best move forward, and so many people that want to fold to obvious answers of militant empire, put up walls and point guns everywhere until we figure it out.
Just like fear monger people into creating an action that they want. Right.
That could be, that's not our best look. I think that's not our strongest play.
So I'm showing we showed some of this last week, just like some of the stuff that you took from like the sit-in protest, where they were being blocked, and I have it muted so you can't hear the whatever beautiful words you were probably saying. But in this, I do believe we talked last week. You said that this protest, it was peaceful, right? There wasn't any sort of instigating that was happening, but there was also sort of this environment of sort of like near fear, maybe from everyone, from the police, from the protesters. You know, it was like everyone was on edge just a little bit.
And I think, and that's also why I keep coming back to this protest. And well done to the group Black Rising and that spearheaded this protest. They did work in conjunction with partners that wanted to help, bolster the numbers. But ultimately, like you described, there's a lot of police that, are, being a police officer is a good city job.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone could hold on to that without, having to excuse their colleagues murdering people on the regular, I'm sure they would like that. And that's the attitude that I get from most police officers that I live in a big cop neighborhood, actually. So like it's, and I'm like this. So like everyone's annoyed, but most cops don't want the problems that that are happening right now. They'd be amenable to reforms that would let them keep a pretty savvy job, as long as the job isn't constantly maligned. But again, this is police saying this to educators, so always a lot of miscommunication happening there. But these protesters decided to work with the police. They adhered to their rules. They stayed within their boundaries. They stayed on the right-hand lane of traffic so that the left lane could still pass. They were pretty quick to keep moving, so that they were slowing traffic down. They weren't immobilizing it.
Mm-hmm.
But that standoff, when they decided to sit in, is when the police would not let them turn down into Evergreen Park. That was the neighborhood that Jason Van Dyke, the police officer that shot Laquan McDonald, a few years ago, that's his neighborhood. It's a big police neighborhood. And, Jason Van Dyke's family suing Laquan McDonald's family. There's like a big brouhaha. And you did feel the tension that the police were both apprehensive about the protesters going off script and deciding to break some windows or to loot some things. They seemed totally posturing, the tough guy posturing, totally ready to do arrests. But also just like that's not really what they had hoped that protest would end in. And the protesters did not shy away from being ready to be arrested until their point was completely made, that they had talked about walking down this other segue of the street, and the police were now stopping them from doing so because they were getting too apprehensive about the neighborhood's reaction to the protesters. So number one, good on the protesters for picking that spot to march. That's when you can work hand in hand with the police, but only when there's that level of tension that something can go wrong, unfortunately. And it's I go back to South Korea's recent protest that ousted their president. The mayor of Seoul, their capital, is now recently in trouble. I think maybe some people had looked into him because he was very acquiescing of the protesters that were protesting against the president and her corruption, her party's corruption more so, and her basically taking the heat for all of that. He decided, like Seoul and Korea have had very rough protests for democracy because of blatant corporate corruption. I was in South Korea when a ferry. I was just a year out, but it was very tragic when a ferry carrying many high school classes, kind of like on a trip, sunk in the river, and the corporate, CEOs of that ferry company, were held responsible and saw jail time because people were up in arms about it. So it's people didn't need to escalate to violence because the flex was already there, and the common courtesy of like, yeah, if these ferries were not properly commissioned and checked for safety to cut costs, and the captain knew about it, and that means that people at the factory knew about it, and that means it goes all the way to the top, then that person at the top is going to jail. And that's something that's common in South Korea. That's not common in the U.S., unfortunately. Like Jeffrey Epstein, how much help did he get?
I'm showing up. Well, while you've been talking, I wanted to look up because I was kind of unfamiliar with the Jason Van Dyke thing, so I was looking that up and reading, and now I'm looking at this webpage about South Korean protests. It's this article from PRI.org about how violent protests in South Korea became a thing of the past. I'm just kind of I'm sort of like reading little snippets and highlighting parts that I see, and for the audience, I just pointed to the screen over here. I don't know. There's a whole lot going on currently. Like Jose is looking at a camera that's right here for me, but you can see me. Whatever. It's there's a lot happening here. But yeah, so what really makes me curious, there's this line in this article about South Korea, right, where it says, protests in South Korea were once characterized by intense, often violent confrontations between demonstrators and the country's security apparatus. But 3 years ago, following months of peaceful rallies that culminated in the removal of a disgraced president, those fierce standoffs seemed to be a thing of the past as national police reforms became the norm. So what were these, like, police reforms, right? Like, how... Because I think in America it sounds really weird to say like that reforming the police in any ways is going to like lower violence. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people might push back against that point.
And I do worry a little bit about. I don't want to like verge on everything that South Korea does is totally correct. It's
well, of course, there's no as Kit says on the show, there's no perfect government, but right. I mean it is a very noteworthy to point out, right, that mm-hmm. that South Korea has definitely de-escalated their demonstrations.
Yeah. Honestly, police, they don't carry guns. I don't believe they even have tasers. But they do have like riot police show up on the regular for things.
Okay, so I mean, there's still like a presence, but it's not a continuous like every cop in America has a gun, but right. But also there are bigger cops with bigger guns, so it's just
right. Like every cop wants to be like super SWAT, RoboCop. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to be officer friendly, but like Korea's like, look, if you want to be a cop, you have to be officer friendly, and if you want to be RoboCop, you have to be in the military this long.
Which isn't, it's also required service in South Korea, isn't it?
Right.
Like an 18-month commitment or something like that?
Right. It's like pretty much 2 years. And yeah, it's seems pretty awful. Most Korean men that I spoke to, they're just like, yeah, no one likes doing that. You live in barracks, you have to...
I'm sure that also gives you, though... I'm sure that also has to give you some semblance of appreciation, though, right?
I mean, it creates a much more nationalistic culture, much more cohesive. Every single male goes through, that experience with their government of being conscripted, to be at their service for 2 years. However you feel about it, you go through it with a cohort, and you all share that experience with each other. So it is something that's pretty, binding.
It would be good. They should move that into, they should require ladies to do the same. Just require everybody.
Maybe. The U.S. doesn't really have something like that other than public school.
Yeah.
Now the billionaire class seems to be pretty eager to take away that semblance of...
Well, I mean, they want to put in charter schools and stuff charter schools can be good, right? But charter schools are private education facilities, right? It's their curriculum. Right. It's their sort of national averages. It's not going to it's not going to be standardized everywhere, unless of
Right.
course you're talking about one private company owns a bunch of different charter schools. Then it would
Like
probably be
Noble, like
standardized.
Uno.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all that stuff that Betsy DeVos has stake in and all. So I mean, I
Well,
think
I mean, 'cause
regardless
does
either
go-
way it comes to regardless either way it comes to in America, right? Like everything ends in capitalism. Everything ends in money being involved in it and someone profiting off of the education of kids or the miseducation of kids or the putting people in jail regardless of your race, but predominantly a lot of African American and Latino people get put into jails for things. At the end of the day in America, it all comes down to who's going to profit off of it and not is it going to make society better.
I think that's precisely it. Since the founding of America, it was private merchants that owned the means of production, basically rebelling against the crown, and trying to organize, the peasantry, the workers,
Mm-hmm.
to fix society, to their liking. And then they got their butts kicked in 1812, which we like to keep bringing up.
It's a really big point for us for some reason still.
For some reason, let's not forget, never forget White House burned down, Gray House burned down, the British.
Yeah.
Technically, it's not like we're like, hey, leave and don't come back. They came back and they're like, we're leaving under these terms. And we're like, oh, okay.
That's cool. Well, that's all right.
Yeah. But all that to say that, yeah, privatization goes back down to billionaires basically feeling entitled to servants, the slaves, to a societal ecosystem that adheres to their image. I mean, look at the Pullman, riots and why that came about. Oh man, union's caught. And that's also why the relationship that organizers have with the police is it's tough to be. It's never meant to really be cohesive, but groups that try to work in some good faith with police that want to kind of reach the other way, to use these inflection points, this wisely, to really agitate at the heart of the situation by protesting in Jason Van Dyke's neighborhood. I just can't commend them enough for those efforts, because there's a lot that's going on. I know that we want to move on. We want to talk a little bit about Lori Lightfoot, but she's going through a lot too, and it really seems clear that she wants to step on the side of the police and be a shield to them,
Mm-hmm.
in order to hopefully get them a bit more acquiescing to doing things her way.
I can understand that point because you can't. Why would the police and the police union, which is police unions are a problem. That's a whole different issue. But I mean, the police in Chicago, right? How are they going to want to stand up for or make any sort of real reforms or changes if their mayor is just constantly accosting them for mistakes that they're making always, right? And always not taking their side. I understand where that comes from and being a tactful leader. I don't know. I don't really have like a complete, fully formed opinion about Lori Lightfoot, just being someone who is coming in. This is only my first year in Chicago, really. So I've entered my second year, right? Or I'm entering into getting to my second year. But I was here whenever Lori Lightfoot got elected as mayor, and all of my friends and people who had been in Chicago longer than me seemed to be very supportive of her. And I did a little bit of research, and I mean, I was not a fan of Rahm Emanuel, mostly just because I was not a fan of that sort of style of leadership, or that sort of style, that sort of backdoor Obama era style of leadership of like we're gonna do it with class, but we're really underhanding everything that's happening, you know.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a fan of Rahm Emanuel in any sense. Also, the elevator in my apartment building, the last time it was serviced was in 2018 under Rahm Emanuel, and that's a lot, and that's it. It's just a random, it's just that's where my brain took me. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of him. So doing a little bit of research into Lori Lightfoot, I was pleasantly surprised at a candidate who really seemed to be very progressive and tried to win the hearts of Chicagoans.
Yeah, she said the right things.
But it is definitely a thin line, right, that you have to walk to be a leader.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Lori does not have an easy job. No major big city mayor has an easy job. The Republicans like to remind everyone that Democrats run big cities. I don't know why that makes them look better, that they don't win elections in big cities, because they can't. Big cities are mostly multicultural. It's usually where all of the immigrants come. It's where America gets made into America in a lot of ways. And, you know, after a time, you know, Chicago is a big city where, you know, Illinois as a whole is a place where the two-party BS really plays out in hyper real time, like very up close.
Mm-hmm.
And Democrats and the Republicans don't really do business differently. They just really are very tribal about it in this state, to the point where, I mean, you can very much see, I often joke that the Democrats are basically the mafia and the Republicans want to harken back to being pilgrims on the Mayflower. And, you know, it's just all these multicultural immigrants making up a mob and these, you know,
and those are two sort of ideals that like are outdated anyways, right?
No, it just seems to be how Illinois is broken up.
I could probably, again, I'm only speaking from kind of experience. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, weird conspiracy theory, swear to God, feel like Tammy Duckworth is going to be the VP just so that her Senate seat is in play so that the Republicans have something to do. Because they would really like a Republican Senate.
Especially in Illinois, right? Like they would love to have just a little bit more pull in a state that's,
And then start turning the tide against Obama, and it's just like, oh, well, the Republicans are just, it's just dumb. I hate the Illinois Policy Institute and all the deep thinkers with big money that do things to the state because they think and do things like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's like kind of everywhere. It's like the way that I would sort of classify a lot of just the big city dynamic, right? Because not every state has its own big city, right? You think about Arkansas, like where I'm from, it's, Little Rock isn't really a big. It's the closest thing that we have to like a big city, right? It's got tall buildings, skyscrapers. It's got it's a very diverse city, right? But at the same time, it's still a very Republican-run state, and a lot of the people seem to be all right with that. Really, the only Democratic or progressive, whatever you want to call it, sort of parts of Arkansas are like up in Fayetteville, northwest Arkansas, kind of where the Walmart headquarters is at, right? It's sort of up in that area because there's a lot of people who are in opposition to the sort of corporate Republican conservative ideals, right? And they all congregated in one area, basically. But I would say, like, whenever I was living in Washington State, it was sort of the same dynamic of you have Seattle, which is a very hyper-liberal city. A lot of, I don't think that I have to, like, say that, right, to anyone. I think everyone understands it. But then around it is country. It's rural areas. It's with a lot of people who don't understand the sort of ideals that Democrats who live in big cities are trying to stand up for, right? Because you can't govern a city and a small town in the same way. You have two different issues. And it's real conflict of interest there for a lot of people, right? But at the same time, it's not like they're fighting their fight in a proper way anyways, right? They're just coming at it from this very partisan, you're doing it wrong, we're never going to come together sort of mentality. And that's kind of like,
Right.
I think every big state that has a big city has a very similar dynamic to that.
Yeah. No, I mean you're nailing a lot of like uh, what our two-party system has become and what it's broken and the dynamic that we really need to be looking at. We say it's a class issue,
Mm-hmm.
and class plays out very differently than it does in rural areas, than it does in city areas, and in major metropolitan areas. And yet, at the same time, you would have more in common with the people that, live a service industry, worker-led life, and the city, with rural folks that are kind of trying to get by on their own. They won't see as much money as someone that lives in the city, but they'll probably know the same struggle that you get, of stress that a working class life affords you. Democrats run major cities because Democrats have become the party of plurality of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
They're still run by the KKK forces of Joe Biden and the Bill Clintons, what they pledged fealty to.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Clinton's, big friends of Walmart, of Atlanta-based CNN, not shy about hanging out with billionaires like the Kochs or Mercers. But Democrats, if you want to, in New York City, where basically all of the European immigrants are coming, and then L.A. More immigration, and Chicago, major hotspot for industry and transportation, more immigrant waves.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it was still attempted to have Republican mayors, but you had you had Rudy Giuliani and you had Michael Bloomberg in New York. Both that could really just be seen as like big time liberals. They govern with their pocketbook, and the Republican Party is becoming less of that and more of Donald Trump. Unfortunately, is it going to be Marco Rubio's Republican Party? Is it going to be Ted Cruz's Republican Party? No. And those are the rock stars they have right now,
Which, they really, it's unfortunate that they were sort of co-opted by a raging narcissist who has spent his entire life just building a brand around his name, right? Like, that's all that Trump is. Trump is just a name on buildings in Chicago, in New York, and in other places, right? Like, Trump is just he's a name brand that a lot of people, especially people who were a lot of people around the time that he was coming up, right? A lot of those people trusted, right? Because in the way that news circulated then, it was like, oh, Trump, this Trump developer guy, right? Like, he's building buildings, he's trying to build casinos, he's trying to do all this other stuff, and what you end up having is a lot of people who say, oh, well, that's a guy who's getting stuff done, and then he is really good at downplaying all of his 6 bankruptcies, the numerous cheatings on his wife, and he was able to turn all of that news into, well, all press is good press, Yeah. And it was that sort of mentality that brought Trump up. And he ran for president once as a Democrat, or he played with it, and then he tried to run as an independent, and then he gave up, and he finally had decided the Republicans are the easiest in for me to get this power grab. And so he did it, and luckily for him, there was enough people who believed in his name brand that means nothing.
Yeah. He sold steaks and sharper image. He's not the most brilliant businessman.
Yeah.
The best he can do about his bankruptcies is play into being a joke. He went on WrestleMania knowing exactly what he was doing. He's a caricature of himself.
Mm-hmm.
Without the self-awareness that Hunter S. Thompson had about, being a caricature of what he was trying to do. Donald Trump's he was a businessman who likes his steaks well done. So that's a really fancy thing to do. It's not.
It's also the worst way to enjoy a
Yeah,
steak. It's just
I do like that, Donald.
yeah, whatever.
But to just go back a little bit to Lori, because I do want to go back to a little bit Chicago. Like, Chicago is a very weird, medium-sized city. It's bigger than Little Rock, so that it's able to be its own ecosystem away from whatever's happening in the state. I'm sure, Arkansas is very Republican run. You probably get that vibe in Little Rock. We've had Republican governors in Illinois. Chicago remains pretty Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of remains its own thing.
I know there's a lot of people who have
New York City.
I know there's a lot of people who have that argument that like they want Chicago to be its own separate entity apart from the state. I know that that's a point that I've heard a lot of people talk about but a lot of those people are, come from the rural Republican areas of the state and they just don't really like Chicago for a bunch of
really to their benefit though.
Yeah, but it's also for a bunch of like exterior reasons, right? It's not because they like hate Chicago or Chicagoans. It's because it's Democrat run and it's this or it's that. It's a bunch of abstract ideas.
That's just rough because Chicago could be its own entity and you'd have a real Singapore situation where that's really good for Chicago and not so good for the surrounding states.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that would kind of like that. We sit next to one of the largest freshwater preserves on the planet in Lake Michigan. And we are quickly and very anxiously trying to be a global city. We're the only city that's lost so much population, in the entire country, not by accident. That's, gentrification. We want to show the world, Ron Emanuel, plan for global Chicago is much less dangerous. It's much more movie friendly. It's much more business friendly. We're trying to be a tech hub. Elon Musk is going to build, a private subway for the rich to go downtown. Like, come and spend, be a rich person.
Yeah.
During the end of the world, the world's on fire and we have all the fresh water and the wackiest weather that you could possibly want.
But we won't even bring into the fact that the city is sinking slowly but surely. Right.
Well, the city is for sale, and it doesn't seem like Lori is on a different game plan than that. And I thought at the very least, because she was running against Ron Emanuel, she was running against his horrible handling of the Quan McDonald murder, she'd at least be a little bit more forthright about, Black Lives Matters as a movement. And she's not. So she's kind of just exactly what the establishment needed, unfortunately.
That's a lot of what we're going to continue to see, I think, from the Democrats, right? Just as time, especially leaving the era of Trump, because I kind of believe that Biden will pull through, just because there's a lot of animosity, even from like people who supported Trump, right? There's a lot of animosity that Trump isn't necessarily handling all of this as well as he should, and even people who were like praising Trump before, it's like you at some point, right, like you kind of get ripped from the reality that he's trying to spin because there's nothing else to look at but the burning world around you and say, well, he's not helping any of that, is he? And I think that like as we push into the rest of this decade, we're just going to keep seeing the Democrats sort of consolidating their base around that idea of finding just establishment people who can get what they want done and who can sort of placate the base, Yeah.
Sorry, some good comments here. Shout out to Mona, who's handling the comments. Gentrified the apocalypse. Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely the neoliberal agenda.
Yeah.
That's precisely it. Conservative agenda is embrace the apocalypse. And the liberals are like, wait, you can make some money off of that. And
Which is really funny considering that conservatives widely, right, have
yeah,
been sort of the movement of people who are all for big business and all for whatever, right? Like just in the
yeah,
front of your brain, right? Like that's how I've always viewed it. Is they're always for businesses making more money and doing whatever, but really, I mean, both sides are working that just to slightly different ends.
yeah. I mean, to slightly different ends. I do feel like there's a weird fatalism within the Republican Party about, if they are harkening back, the glory of the Pilgrims and this country and what it's founded on. It's a Christian nation. I mean, it also gets very dark and apocalyptic kind of quick.
Very.
Whereas you have Hillary's just like, well, maybe make a deal with Satan and like you just keep going, and be in charge of the whole cinder. Um, so like I did, somebody said, oh yeah, Mona says I do think Trump might win. I I wanted to plug a book, which call it. I don't know if you can pull it up for them. Thomas Frank, The People Know. I still been meaning to read this. I'm halfway through his other book, Listen Liberal. But his first book that I read, What's the Matter with Kansas? I refer to Thomas Frank for all things populism, actual populism as it pertains to the American, what you call it, historical experience. He very accurately in his book, What's the Matter with Kansas, talks a lot about like the big city rural divide and the breakup between conservative values of your everyday working class American, and those of the Republican Party and what they actually implement, and the failures of the Democratic Party by moving towards big money, big city liberal politics, and moving away from any kind of union working class dynamics. He really gets to the heart. I mean, like really, it's been a nice arc. What's the Matter with Kansas? He goes on to write Listen Liberal in 2016, really talking about the failures of the Democrats to listen to working class people. And he wrote this before Donald Trump won, so it was really kind of he was pretty much calling um, a Donald Trump's America happening now with the people of no. He talks about Donald Trump and European extremism, and their racist philosophy, being uh, concentrated to be tied up into populism, as a huge mistake and not accurate what's happening. And my own personal view is that that's a very concentrated effort by the 1% of the planet, to deem any kind of populism and tie it to the racist, what you call it, white nationalism of Donald Trump and Bolsonaro and other figures that you see in Europe. Um, what you call it, and he talks a lot in this book, and this is what I want to read it about concentrated efforts against populism, anti-populist figures
Mm-hmm.
in history, because I think you will find that we are living in an era where that such figures are becoming much more pronounced. Populism is basically the populace trying to hold power accountable, um, simply by the flex of force that there's more of us than there are of you. It's not a flex that power really appreciates, and those dynamics can come about in any number of ways. But one of the things that's really a problem with gentrification and what's happening in Chicago is that we're losing the population of people that would rise up and make their stories and personal experiences heard and understood, so that we could really understand what's at stake here with these changes that the city's going through, what we're losing, and the short-sightedness of what we're gaining and we're not gaining. If the city doesn't turn around in a few years' time by many other metrics, Lori could be looking at challengers from many different directions, not just her left.
Mona had a good. Speaking of left, Mona had a good comment up here. saying that Trump won because he ran to the left of Hillary. Just saying, and
Yeah.
that's a very fair point.
And he could do that again with Biden. Bernie saying that Biden is going to be the most progressive president since FDR is not, you know, that didn't help Hillary.
Yeah, and it's not because that's just a phrase. That's just a sentence, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't have any place in the reality that is Biden, right? Because we know
Right.
that he has not been a progressive leader
Yeah.
really ever. So, I
I
mean,
mean, black voters didn't really turn out for Hillary, but Latino voters did turn out to be against Donald Trump. Um, Latinos went really hard for Bernie Sanders, and we're not really seeing a lot of his platform materialize in Biden's platform. And then you have what Kanye is up to right now. And I don't know how that's going to shake out. He might keep making, a stake while it's in November. And you could see a lot of less turnout. That's how I see Donald Trump winning, because you don't have Cambridge Analytica targeting states at the precinct level with messaging.
mhm.
That's illegal now. So he's really lost a golden bullet. But by depreciating turnout, and I don't know a better candidate that can do that than Joe Biden, um, Trump has, some skin in the game. I do think that it is pretty stacked against them because, as you said, even his most diehard fans look at reality around them and it's like, well, this is also hard to defend.
That's yeah, and I mean, and they will in the end, like those people who voted for Trump before, who still plan on voting for Trump, they will continue to deny the reality that is Trump isn't a good leader. As you know, they'll probably defend it to their grave. But there were people who did that for Richard Nixon and every other candidate. You know what I mean? It's not just the bad candidates, right? Every single president.
Richard Nixon twice, yeah.
Yeah, they always have their stands. I was in the 9th grade when Obama was elected, and I was a stand for Obama mostly just because I had finally come out of the bubble of conservatism that I had grown up in, because I would come home every day and my dad would be have Fox News on in the background, and I would hear it, right? And I just started to come to the realization that like everything that they're saying doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of coming out of that bubble, and also like having dinner conversations with my dad where he would talk about how Obama is gonna take away your guns, or he stands for hope and change, but he's not talking about any there's no hope, and the change is in your pocket. And that was true in the end, that Obama did end up becoming the sort of centrist, moderate, democratic president who definitely took money out of people's pockets, whether it's business people or whatever, right?
Right.
That did end up becoming true in a ways, but I also, just a side tangent, think that my dad was a little bit racist. And so there's also that, right? And that was a lot of people who didn't vote for Obama in 2009 or in 2013 or whatever, 2012. So it's a dual-edged sword, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was a stand for Obama for a lot of the same reasons. A lot of the antagonism against him and the Latino community, I pretty much felt was mostly due to racism. And a lot of the things that people were upset about, I was like, well, George Bush was doing that, and he's just getting in. So, like, how do we change these things? 8 years later, then I was just like, oh, yeah, he didn't change anything. But I still have a modicum of like, like not just like for Obama and not just sympathy, but he's been a terrible person to the Middle East and to Latin America. Um, uh, and I don't know how many other places in the world might say better things, but being the first black president, I think about Harold Washington and Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
He was our first black mayor. And I remember growing up in Little Village, and there was just random strangers on the street had things to say about Harold Washington being a horrible man, being this why Little Village is a ghetto, why there's so many savages around here, things like that. There was and this is also my fixation with Ed Burke. There was a concentrated effort after Harold Washington's Chicago to not just malign his accomplishments and undo any of the things that he was working towards doing. He did have some brilliant ideas that have survived him. Number one, the way he used tips. Now it's very corrupt. At the time, it was a pretty clever way to expedite a lot of the things that he wanted to do. There was a concentrated effort to really prove Harold Washington a failure in my childhood. I grew up with that. I see the same thing happening with Obama. You know, Donald Trump winning twice in a row against Obama's VP. It's just like, how can you not better walk into just being completely trounced in your efforts, to be something. And that's something that white supremacy is very important to white supremacy. Scientifically, factually, conquering and proving superiority and inferiority. And within those dynamics, I feel like Obama understand. I mean, I always felt during Obama's presidency that he was, bowing to the white supremacy of America. Like, I will be an American president, white supremacy and all. Just let me be an American president. And this country really, Mitch McConnell, the Republican Party, Donald Trump, really had a problem with that. Even doing that little, that was not much, just, and like just being the president that he was without helping us all that much, helping rich people as much as he did, was still a problem to Mitch McConnell, to Donald Trump, and the Republican Party did this to themselves. America did this to themselves.
That's true.
So
that's very
it's
true.
like part of me can see the net benefit of Donald Trump winning again and us working to really destroy the Democratic Party, its neoliberal inclinations and ties to big money. But even if you break up the shell of the Democratic Party, that big money and those guns and those rich people will still be there. Now with Donald Trump on a second term and completely unhinged. Joe Biden winning would be awful, but I understand that a lot of the moves that Obama has done has been under the guise, the pressure of those dynamics, that he does not want history to bear out the way that it did for Harold Washington, the way it did for so many other African-American leaders who were the first at something. He was the first president, and he doesn't want to go out like a punk. So, he did a bunch of corrupt things to get his boy in, and now he's gotta see it through.
Yeah, now what?
Now what? Get police out of Chicago public schools, Obama. Start with that.
I mean, he's building a whole. Whenever I first moved to Chicago, I lived in Hyde Park, which is like very near. It's near South Side. It's very. It's a sort of decentralized area that's. It's got like the University of Chicago is there, and so it's built up around that. But also at the same time, it definitely there could be more effort and work put into building up businesses, especially African American owned businesses in that area, because it is a predominantly African American region.
Davis.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I took a class in college, whatever, that was just about museums in Chicago, right? Because I went to an art school, and so that was something. And I love museums now, and there's plenty of them in Chicago. But one that if you are a viewer pointing to the camera that Jose can't see, and you ever come to Chicago and you want to see something or go somewhere and learn something really, really important, right? I really recommend the DuSable Museum of African American History.
Yeah.
It's located in Hyde Park, sort of like at the other end of I don't remember what the park's name, but it's like this really giant park. This is where it's at. But it's funded entirely by. It was started entirely by African American artists from the time. And it is still funded today, largely in part just by donations and people who show up to the place. But it is definitely a beautiful place to go and just spend a day, just walking around in the park. It's beautiful, and go into the museum and just take a moment to reflect, right? And they have a whole exhibit there about Harold Washington, that has like they have like a glass box thing of like all of these different like pins from his first election. And really the reason why Harold Washington was such a powerful mayor was because he was a man of the people, right? Especially a completely underrepresented people in Chicago at the time. And that really gave him a platform to say like, look, it's getting worse and worse and worse, and we're segregating, but we need to come together and realize that their problems, that my problems are your problems, right?
Yeah.
And that was what made him so successful. So I definitely recommend. I mean, there's tons of museums to do in Chicago, but this one really.
Luis Gutierrez was one of Harold Washington's guys for the Puerto Rican vote. Chuy Garcia working for the Mexican vote. Constituencies that didn't, Puerto Ricans and Mexicans didn't even really work together at the time. They banded together to help Harold Washington. Harold Washington was a member of the machine. He was also a very studious and smart politician. What was happening too, I'm sorry, our only woman, our first woman mayor, there's Lori, she was not in good graces with Ed Burke and Michael Madigan, who put up M. Daley, Jay Daley's son, for the mayoralship. So Harold Washington noticed the schism between that powerful block of power within the Irish machine. And he's like, yo, this is our shot. Everybody put your stuff together and we can do something right now. And they did, And that's how he made political history. Like I mentioned Obama's story with Dick Dirt, the machine had it out for the Republican senator candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically, Obama got to waltz into a senatorial seat, and he's having to sit down with like, hey, Hillary's not going to help us with our banking problems, and that's how he got it. And now he has this situation, with Donald Trump in front of him. And I say that because his problem is now our problem. What he's hung up on, is affecting all of our lives. And the same, unfortunately, is true of Donald Trump. Like if he likes Goya this week, maybe next week he won't, but maybe, I don't know.
Jose, I'm going to send you this article that TCK Punch sent me, just so you know what we're talking about. Because I want to bring it up because it's a...
I never get phone calls while we're doing this thing. It's so weird. Biden outlines $2 trillion climate change plan. Ooh, and we are kind of going over time.
We are going a little bit over time. I'm just gonna, what do they call it? Story zero. My other story, which was basically the outline of it is that Lori Lightfoot has instituted a program in Chicago that would clear students' debt for the city colleges in Chicago, so that essentially to bring economic relief to the city and to bring people back to the city. I think that that's a great idea. I haven't really read into it all that much, but I mean, just the simple fact that whenever I got back to Chicago right before we went on lockdown, I helped my like best friend and my roommate now move out of his college dorm on like a 4 days notice. And pretty much every college in Chicago did that, where they just said like, hey, we want to try and help you stay, but then like a few days later they were like, oh no, it's not going to work, so you have 4 days to move out, and that's it. And that displaced a lot of people, put a lot of people in a bad taste in their mouth about returning to colleges in Chicago, and also leaves a lot of people in a lot of debt, a lot of financial stress, because a lot of people, especially people I went to college with, right? I met quite a few people who they lived in the South Side, and college, this was like their only opportunity to get out of the South Side to sort of experience more of the city that they had grown up in, but they hadn't really been a part of. And to essentially kick out all of these students and put them on the street, if I were still going to college and that was the situation, it would have put me out on the street. So yeah, I think that this is a good move. Congrats, Lori Lightfoot, on doing a good thing. Yeah. One of numerous good things that I'm sure is happening, but is marred by all of this bad news that everyone wants to talk about.
It's a good thing. It's not a new idea. It's something that's been talked about for a minute. The tuition-free college plan of Bernie Sanders. When it was first really talked about in 2016. Making city colleges tuition-free was something that Ron Emanuel was trying to work on to make a reality. I think they have something that was implemented like that in New York by Andrew Cuomo. I think, he sat down with Bernie Sanders at one point for a photo op too. Not to knock on Lori because she actually seems like she's actually pulling the trigger on this, which is great. Our city college is definitely underutilized resource that we can be using a lot more, and prime and ready for a big development gentrification push for a whole new young people to be coming to Chicago, just the way Ron Emanuel planned. Yeah.
It's the machine's wishes are coming true. Okay, so now we're going to briefly go over this just because it seems interesting, right?
$1 trillion.
$2 trillion climate plan proposed by Biden. Presumptive Democrat nominee Joe Biden on Tuesday outlined an updated climate plan seeking to invest $2 trillion to boost clean energy. This is just I'm trying to skip over all of the writing of the article. I don't really care about what Biden said he wants to do. I want to know what it is,
Yeah, they don't really say.
The plan would aim to achieve a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035. It would also upgrade 4 million buildings, weatherize homes. It would shift major cities towards public transportation and create millions of good, rebuilding Americans' crumbling infrastructure. These all just seem kind of like platitudes.
It sounds like an infrastructure bill, and they just call it a climate bill.
Yeah, which you can't deny that public transportation would be a really, really great way to shift some of the burden of climate change off of, and car pollution in general. I'm not even talking about carbon emissions, but car pollution in major cities is horrendous now as it is. So public transportation would be a brilliant thing for more cities to adopt. I know that Seattle, whenever I was leaving there, was kind of finally starting to really build that. But Chicago, our public transit is good. I take public transit every single day, and it's good, it's effective, but it is old.
It's very old.
It's very old.
We used to have electric rail cars going all over the city. And people got tired of the electric wires, and the CTA was the neoliberal solution to that much more sustainable, clean mode of transportation that the city used to run on. This isn't, eh. The thing that kills me about this is that we could have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We could have had an infrastructure bill that rebuilt our public transportation and offset climate change, our carbon footprint 10 years ago. We didn't because Mitch McConnell wanted to make Obama a one-term president.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally it.
Yeah.
We knew everything, all the science, all the studies, all the money, all the jobs, all the things that we've known. We could have done it like that, but
Instead,
you
we
would have had
just
to
we
hire a
just
bunch of union people to build up America's cities. You would have given Obama a huge win with a big infrastructure bill, and you can't do that with the first black president. No, keep bombing the Middle East.
Yeah.
Keep feeding those brown kids. He fought really hard for cannabis to be Schedule 2, not even, descheduling, Schedule 2 instead of Schedule 1, and he fought for that infrastructure bill so that he can give all his mobster friends, a lot of that developer graft money. But no, they didn't want to let Obama do that because it's just because, for no reason. It's just bad business. That's
Yeah.
the other thing that tells me. Like, yes, Obama is a murderous imperialist president. If he had descheduled cannabis and passed an infrastructure bill, all of our lives would have been infinitely better right now. Infinitely better.
Mm-hmm.
Jerks didn't let him do it because he was black. Like, I'm not.
So
gonna
then,
that
like,
vote
you have
ever.
to put yourself like if I were Obama in that situation, right? And it's like you come into it and you're like, I want to do all of this good. Of course, I'm going to uphold what my political overlords want, right? But it's like I want to do all this good, so I can sort of mask my good that I'm
Not even
doing with all
was
this.
Good, just like a little bit.
Yeah, not a lot of good, right? But I mean, like Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act was a good first step, right? It was just a tax thing, but it was a good first step. And then
It
the
covered
Republicans,
the existing conditions, which I've always been grateful for, because otherwise I wouldn't have health insurance.
yeah, and millions of Americans would have loved that, right? But the way that the Republicans ended up spinning it, a lot of people who had pre-existing health conditions who would have loved this plan ended up hating it because it was just branded as Obamacare and it's not going to help do whatever. It's
Right.
not, it ends up being a nothing burger, right? And then
Yeah.
so if I were Obama after that and just being stonewalled at every single turn, of course, why not just finish out my presidency by just bombing the crap out of Middle Eastern countries and sort of becoming this oppressive regime, right, that the Republicans wanted. The whole reason why they wanted to do all of this, like, why not? It's the only reason that I can get anything done, so we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that sucks because that's American politics. But the last line of this article, and we do this and then we'll finish up, says the climate initiatives follow the unveiling of lengthy policy recommendations from joint task forces created by Biden and his one-time primary rival, the progressive Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And while I think that maybe part of this comes from those talks, no, I don't think that it's at all what Bernie Sanders would have put up. And so that's why, like, this entire article, right, it's like I started it and it's like, cool, you want to do all this stuff, you want to invest $2 trillion, but I hear a lot of people talk about how, we want to invest $2 trillion over the next 10 years to do this, to do that, and it's like, cool, that I get it that you need to have like a budget that fits a length of time, right? But how is any of that going to get done? What are the more specifics of this plan? Why does it matter? Why should we spend $2 trillion to boost clean energy and rebuild infrastructure if I don't know what that actually means?
Right. It sounds nice. I mean, a carbon-free energy sector sounds enticing. For that amount of money, it sounds like you're letting Exxon run ethanol, gas stations, and like letting Elon Musk just go ham on Bolivia and like minerals on the cheap, subsidized by Fed dollars so that, he can just keep building batteries and batteries and batteries.
And that kind of brings me back to like what I had talked about before, right? Is that everything in America ends in capitalism. It ends in who's gonna profit, where's the money come from. So like whenever I look at a story like this, it's like, all right, cool, spend $2 trillion to do whatever. Where's the money gonna go? Whose pockets are we lining with this plan?
Right. Private
And-
contractors,
Yeah.
If we had a public solar panel energy grid, then there'd be no profit in that. And then who's going to want to maintain it for the good of society? I mean, maybe society.
I can't profit off of the sun. That's, yeah. It's a
Capitalists' biggest nemesis. It's like free energy and like services all the time. Like, wow.
You mean to tell me it just works and like it comes from the natural thing that exists and gives all of us energy? I can't make money off of it, so nah.
No.
Daniel in the comments said the budget for this plan is 2 times the amount of money that the 10% cut Bernie wants to cut from the defense budget. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yikes. I mean, our money should be, instead of going to military contractors, it's going to major international developers, I guess maybe not Donald Trump this time around, which is probably why he was so upset 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And ended up running for president.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said.
Hey, so that was a lot of Chicago talk.
That was. I think we really nailed it. We'll be back again on Thursday.
Yeah.
Around the same time. Well, hopefully at 2.
At 2.
Not late. That's sort of the plan.
That's not good.
And that's fine. Yeah, if you want to see more content like this, hit a like, hit subscribe, share it with a friend. We will be today's Tuesday, so we're not doing the podcast tonight. But we're making content all week round. Follow us on Twitter. That's usually where all of YouTube is really bad about sending notifications to anybody. So Twitter is where you can find out what our schedule is. I actually posted a tweet and pinned it so you can see what the schedule is for everything that we have so far. And we're adding more constantly. We're just trying to build up a network and be great and do all that stuff. So we appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah.
Jose, any final words before we head out?
Great show, Gunner.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Yeah. Great show, Jose. And you're the best. And I hope that you all I hope that everyone out there just be well. And that's all I'm going to say.
Stay safe and be healthy.
Approaching the 155,000-foot mark in altitude, some 26 miles downrange. And that the solid rocket boosters performed as expected in the first stage of this 8.5-minute ride to orbit. Call indicating that if one engine fails right now, Discovery has enough velocity, enough inertia to make a transatlantic abort at the prime TAL site at Ben Gurion on the west coast of Africa. All systems continue, however, to function normally at the 3.5-minute mark into the flight. Call for the fellow DTS. A call from spacecraft communicator Chris Brown to Commander Tom Hendricks gives the approval for mission specialist Don Thomas to unstrap from his seat during the first effects of weightlessness.